The autumn of 1932 arrived at Saranjai with a quiet sigh. The air, crisp and carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, swept down from the mountains surrounding the small temple, coaxing the maple leaves into a blaze of crimson and gold. For Kenji, a monk of only 24 years, this season was a time for deeper contemplation. The world outside the temple walls shedding its skin in preparation for the silence of winter. But this year, silence was in short supply. The steady rhythm of monastic life, the pre-dawn chants, the meticulous sweeping of the gravel garden, the long hours of meditation, had been disrupted by the clang of hammers and the shouts of workmen. The great outer wall, a casualty of time and a minor tremor the previous spring, was finally being rebuilt. The work was necessary, a practical matter of security and preservation, yet Kenji found the noise grating, an intrusion into the serene emptiness he had come to cherish. He was overseeing the work one afternoon, his dark robes catching the cool breeze, when a shout from the crew broke his concentration. It wasn't a cry of alarm, but of surprise. Two of the laborers, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt, were crouched at the edge of a newly dug trench for the foundation. They gestured for him to come closer. "Kenji-san," one of them said, his voice hushed with a kind of reverence. "Look." There, nestled in the dark, overturned soil, was the curve of a stone shoulder. It was not mere rock. The shape was too deliberate, too soft. Under Kenji's guidance, the men worked carefully, trading their heavy picks for smaller trowels and eventually their bare hands. They dug with the patience of archaeologists, brushing away centuries of compacted earth. An hour later, 3 figures had been liberated from their earthen tomb. They were not grand Buddhas or fearsome guardian kings. They were smaller, about the height of a child, and carved from a dark, porous stone now stained with patches of moss and soil. They appeared to be Jizo, the bodhisattva protector of travelers and children, but their faces were unlike any Kenji had ever seen. The artists who had carved them had eschewed the traditional beatific serenity for something far more human. One had its head tilted, its lips parted as if in the middle of a sentence. Another had its eyes closed, a profound and weary sorrow etched into its brow. The third looked forward with a startling directness, its expression a mixture of resilience and warning. Master Aikaku, the head abbot, came to inspect the find. He was a man whose calm was as deep and unshakable as the mountains themselves. He ran a wrinkled hand over the damp stone, his eyes missing nothing. "A fortunate discovery," he declared, his voice a low rumble. "They are old, perhaps from the Kamakura period, forgotten during some past renovation. They have protected the temple from beneath the ground. Now they will protect it from within." His view was practical, historical. To him, they were artifacts, a blessing on the temple's restoration. He tasked Kenji with their care. "Clean them, Kenji. Find a place of honor for them in the Hondo. They have spent long enough in the dark." Kenji bowed, accepting the duty. But as the statues were carefully carried to a sheltered workshop, he felt a pull that went beyond mere historical curiosity. It was in their faces, the captured moments of emotion, the silent stories they seemed desperate to tell. He felt less like a custodian and more like an audience member, arriving just as a long-interrupted play was about to resume. That night, the temple fell into a profound quiet. The workmen were gone, and the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves skittering across the wooden veranda. Kenji could not sleep. The image of the statues was imprinted behind his eyelids. After the final bell had rung, he lit a single lantern and made his way to the small hall where he had left them to dry. The lantern cast long, dancing shadows, making the room feel both intimate and vast. The air was thick with the smell of old wood, drying earth, and the faint, clean scent of the oil in his lamp. He knelt before the first statue, the one with its lips slightly parted. He had a soft cloth and a bowl of clean water, and he began to work, gently wiping away the last remnants of its long burial. He worked in silence, his mind quiet, focused only on the task. He traced the line of the statue's jaw, the gentle curve of its stone robe. The silence in the room deepened until it was a physical presence. As his fingers brushed across the stone lips, a thought bloomed in his mind, as clear and distinct as a spoken word. The cold it seeps into the stone for so long. Kenji froze. His hand recoiled from the statue as if it were hot. He looked around the empty hall, his heart suddenly pounding against his ribs. The flame in the lantern flickered, but no one was there. The thought had not been his. The cadence, the weary weight of it, it felt ancient, alien. It was an old man's lament, not the fleeting thought of a young monk. He shook his head, a nervous laugh catching in his throat. Fatigue. The endless noise of the construction, the excitement of the discovery. His mind was playing tricks on him. He was a man of Zen, trained to observe the machinations of the mind without attachment. This was just another thought, a piece of mental flotsam. He took a deep, steadying breath and forced himself to return to his task. But the feeling would not leave. A profound, empathetic sorrow washed over him, a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He looked at the statue, at its parted lips and expectant gaze, and he could almost feel the crushing weight of centuries of darkness, the silent pressure of the earth. He felt an inexplicable urge to answer, to offer some comfort to the stone figure. He rose to his feet, backing away slowly. He extinguished the lantern, plunging the hall into near-total darkness, leaving the three figures as silent silhouettes against the paper screens. He retreated to his quarters, but the echo of that simple, sorrowful thought followed him. It was not a ghost or a spirit. He did not believe in such things. It was something else, something born in the space between his own solitude and the statue's silent, expressive face. He had been tasked with bringing them out of the dark, but he felt as though he had unearthed a silence that was about to speak. The following dawn broke cold and sharp over the mountains, painting the sky in pale shades of gray and rose. For Kenji, sleep had been a fleeting visitor, chased away by the echo of a thought that was not his own. The morning chants felt hollow in his mouth, the familiar sutras turning to ash on his tongue. Every word about detachment and the illusion of the self felt like a cruel joke. He moved through his chores with the stiff precision of an automaton, sweeping the fallen maple leaves from the stone paths, polishing the great temple bell until it gleamed. But his mind was elsewhere. It was in the main hall, standing in the shadows with the three silent figures. He told himself it was a waking dream, a trick of the mind, born from fatigue and the flickering candlelight. The mind, Master Ikaku often taught, was a restless sea, capable of conjuring phantoms from its depths. Yet the memory felt too real, too distinct. It had a texture, a weight. The sorrow had been as palpable as the cold stone under his fingertips. He replayed the moment 100 times, the sudden, clear thought piercing the silence of his own consciousness. So long in the cold earth, so dark. It wasn't a voice he heard with his ears, but a feeling he understood with his soul. Later that morning, while tending to the moss garden, he saw Master Ikaku observing him from the veranda of his quarters. The old monk's gaze was not accusatory, but patient, like a hawk watching a field mouse, aware of its every tremor. Kenji's hands stilled, the small bamboo rake frozen above the pristine green carpet. He felt a flush of shame, as if his secret thoughts were written plainly on his face. Ikaku simply nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible gesture, before turning his attention back to the scroll in his lap. The brief interaction did nothing to calm Kenji's nerves. It only amplified his sense of isolation. He was hiding something in a place where there were meant to be no secrets from oneself or from the path. His resolve to dismiss the experience as fantasy began to crumble as the day wore on. The pull towards the main hall was a physical ache, a thirst that water could not quench. During the quiet hours of the afternoon, when the other monks were occupied with their studies or meditating in their cells, Kenji found himself abandoning his task of mending torn shoji screens. He laid the tools down with deliberate care, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had to know. He had to try again. The main hall was cavernous and still, the air thick with the scent of aged wood and old incense. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the beams. The three statues sat in their place of honor, their expressions unchanged, yet seeming to hold the collected silence of the room. Kenji approached slowly, his soft-soled tabi making no sound on the polished floorboards. He felt like an intruder in his own home. He knelt before the second statue, the one with its face tilted slightly upwards, its stone lips parted as if in a silent gasp of awe or despair. This one, he had thought yesterday, looked like it was witnessing a tragedy. He resisted the urge to clean it, to perform a task that would give him an excuse for being there. Instead, he simply looked, letting his eyes trace the delicate lines of the carving, the arch of the brow, the curve of the cheek, the profound emptiness in the eyes. "Who were you?" he whispered, the sound startlingly loud in the immense quiet. His voice was a fragile thing. He felt foolish, speaking to a block of stone. A child telling secrets to a doll. He waited, listening not with his ears, but with his entire being. He slowed his breathing, attempting to clear his mind as he would for Zazen, but this was different. He wasn't emptying his mind, he was opening it. He reached out a trembling hand and laid his palm flat against the statue's cold, stone chest. He closed his eyes. At first, there was nothing but the thrumming of his own pulse and the chill of the rock. He was about to pull away, convinced of his own foolishness, when it came. It wasn't a sentence this time, but a cascade of sensation. A fleeting image, more feeling than sight, blossomed behind his eyes. A shower of pale pink petals falling against a turbulent gray sky. Cherry blossoms, but there was no joy in them. With the image came a wave of overwhelming grief, a sense of loss so profound it stole his breath. It was the feeling of watching something beautiful and perfect be utterly destroyed. It was a memory of a final, heartbreaking goodbye. The feeling vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving Kenji gasping, his hand recoiling from the statue as if burned. He stumbled back, his legs weak. He leaned against a wooden pillar for support, his mind reeling. This was not his memory. This was not his sorrow. He had never felt a loss so complete, so ancient. The rational part of his mind, the part that clung to Master Aikaku's teachings, was screaming, "This is illusion. This is your own heart projecting its anxieties onto the stone." But the other part of him, the part that had felt the cold of the earth and the rain of sorrowful petals, knew otherwise. It was real. He was not going mad. He was listening. The line between belief and madness was a river Kenji had now crossed. He no longer stood on the bank of skepticism, dipping a toe in the chilling water of the unknown. He was submerged, carried by a current he couldn't fight, and his only choice was to learn how to swim. The question had fundamentally changed. It was no longer, "Am I losing my mind?" but rather, "What are they trying to tell me?" 2 nights passed in which he forced himself to stay away from the storage hall. He performed his chores with a deliberate, almost exaggerated diligence, hoping his renewed focus would be noticed, a preemptive defense against any suspicion. He swept the temple corridors, his mind not on the dust motes dancing in the shafts of autumn light, but on the fragments of memory he now carried. A lament of cold darkness, and cherry blossoms falling against a sky bruised with storm clouds. They were 2 pieces of a puzzle, and he knew the third piece lay with the final statue. On the third night, a sliver of a moon offered little light, and the chill in the air had a sharper edge, promising the coming winter. Kenji slid open the heavy door to the hall, the familiar scent of old timber, earth, and something else. The faint, clean smell of stone, washing over him. He lit a single candle, its small flame pushing back the immense darkness, casting long, dancing shadows that made the room feel alive. His gaze fell upon the third statue. It stood apart from the others, not in distance, but in spirit. Where the first was a vessel of sorrow and the second a portrait of grief, this one was a study in defiance. Carved from a darker, rougher stone, the figure was tensed. Its jaw was set, its brow furrowed in a glare that seemed to challenge the very shadows. Its hands were not held in prayer or repose, but clenched into tight fists at its sides. It radiated an energy of fierce, unyielding resistance. Kenji felt a knot of apprehension tighten in his stomach. The memories of sorrow and grief had been overwhelming. He feared what a memory born of such anger might do to him. He knelt, placing the candle on the floor. The flickering light played across the statue's resolute features, making it seem as if its stony lip curled in a silent snarl. He took a deep, centering breath, mimicking the meditation's master Ikaku led each morning. Clear the mind, be a still pond, reflect what is without judgment. I am listening, he whispered, his voice a dry rustle in the silence. He extended a trembling hand, pausing just inches from the statue's chest. He could almost feel a heatless energy radiating from it, a vibration of contained power. He pressed his palm flat against the cold, unyielding stone. The impact was instantaneous and utterly different. There was no coherent thought, no vivid visual scene. Instead, his senses were assaulted by a chaotic tempest of sound. It was as if his ear was pressed against the door of a forgotten war. He heard the sharp, percussive clang of steel striking steel, a sound so clear he flinched. Beneath it, the distant, mournful cry of a horagai, a conch shell trumpet, sliced through the air, a call to charge or to retreat. And under it all, a guttural shout, a man's voice, raw with effort and fury, but the word itself was snatched away by a phantom wind. It was not a memory to be watched, but a battle to be heard, a cacophony of violent struggle that vibrated through his bones. It was confusing, terrifying, and agonizingly incomplete. Kenji snatched his hand back as if burned, stumbling backward and landing hard on the dusty floorboards. He gasped for air, his heart hammering against his ribs. The silence of the hall rushed back in, profound and absolute, making the phantom sounds seem all the more real. He stared at the defiant statue, its expression unchanged, yet he could no longer see it as mere stone. It was a witness, a silent repository of a violent past. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness near the doorway. "Brother Kenji?" The voice, sharp and laced with an undisguised thread of suspicion, cut through Kenji's daze. He scrambled to his feet, turning to see the lean silhouette of Satoshi, a younger monk who had joined the temple that spring. Satoshi held a paper lantern, and in its steady, pale glow, Kenji knew his own face must be a mask of terror, pale, wide-eyed, and slick with sweat. Satoshi took a step into the room, his gaze flicking from Kenji's disheveled state to the three statues, then back again. "It is the middle of the night. What are you doing?" I was checking on them," Kenji stammered, his mind racing to weave a plausible lie. "The dust, I wanted to ensure they were properly covered." Satoshi's lips thinned. He was of a new generation, one that saw the temple's traditions through a lens of practicality and modern skepticism. He called the old scrolls history, not scripture, and the temple's rituals meditations for the mind, not pleas to the heavens. He was ambitious, and he made no secret of his belief that Saranjai needed to shed its old-world superstitions. "You spend more time with these stones than you do in the meditation hall," Satoshi stated, his voice flat. He took another step closer. "I have seen you, Kenji. You come here when you think no one is watching. You talk to them. It is strange. Unhealthy?" He gestured toward the defiant figure. "They are artifacts, not gods, remnants of a forgotten time. To give them this much attention is a form of idolatry." The accusation hung in the cold air, a direct challenge to Kenji's piety. To be accused of idolatry was a serious matter. "It is not idolatry," Kenji said, his voice steadier than he felt. "It is contemplation. I am contemplating the artistry, the emotion their sculptors captured." Satoshi's expression was unconvinced. A flicker of something, pity, or perhaps contempt crossed his face. "You look unwell. Perhaps the responsibility is too much for you." His voice softened into a feigned concern that was far more unnerving than his direct accusation. "I am concerned for your well-being. Master Ikaku should be made aware that you are overwrought, that you have become distracted by these figures." The threat was clear. "I will tell him." Kenji felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. His secret, so personal and so profound, was now in danger of being dragged into the light and dissected by unsympathetic eyes. Master Ikaku might be understanding, but Satoshi would frame it as delusion, as madness. Kenji bowed his head, a gesture of humility he hoped would placate the younger monk. "Your concern is noted, Brother Satoshi. Thank you, but I am well. I was merely finishing for the night." He forced himself to walk toward the door, not daring to glance back at the statues. He could feel Satoshi's skeptical gaze on his back, a palpable weight of judgment. As he slid the door shut, plunging the statues back into darkness, the phantom sounds of battle echoed one last time in his mind. He had a third piece of the puzzle, but now he also had an adversary. His solitary quest had just become a dangerous secret. The days that followed Satoshi's confrontation were a quiet torment. The air in Saranjai, once a source of calm, now felt thick with unspoken accusation. Every rustle of leaves in the courtyard sounded like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to hold Satoshi's scrutinizing gaze. Kenji performed his duties with a new, hollow diligence. He swept the wooden walkways with meticulous strokes, his mind 1,000 miles away. He chanted the morning sutras, the familiar words feeling foreign on his tongue. The statues, now covered by simple canvas cloths in the corner of the half-finished hall, were a constant, silent pull he had to resist. He knew Satoshi was watching. The younger monk's presence was a physical weight, a constant reminder that his private journey was no longer his own. He couldn't return to the statues, not directly. To do so would be to confirm Satoshi's suspicions, to hand him the very evidence he needed to go to Master Aikaku. The thought made Kenji's stomach clench. He pictured the head monk's face, not with anger, but with a deep, furrowed disappointment that would be far worse. The accusation wouldn't be of communicating with spirits. That was too fanciful. It would be of obsession, of neglecting his duties, of creating a personal idolatry that strayed from the path. It was a charge he couldn't defend without sounding insane. The three memories echoed within him, a discordant trinity. The deep, personal sorrow of a single soul, the vast, atmospheric grief of a communal loss, the sharp, chaotic violence of battle. They were fragments, pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting a single, tragic event. Sorrow, grief, battle. The words circled in his mind as he scrubbed the temple floors. How could they belong together? He needed a thread, a historical context to bind them. An idea began to form, not as a flash of insight, but as a slow, creeping dawn. If the statues were old, truly ancient as their style suggested, then they were artifacts. And artifacts had histories. The temple itself was a vessel of history, its memory stored not in stone, but in ink and paper. The library. Saranjai's library was not a grand hall, but a small, dense room tucked away behind the main prayer hall. It was a place few of the younger monks entered, reserved mostly for Master Aikaku's scholarly pursuits. The air inside was cool and still, saturated with the dry, sweet scent of aging paper, cedarwood, and old ink. Sunlight struggled through a single, high window, illuminating floating dust motes in a solitary beam. Shelves overflowed with scrolls tied with faded silk cords and hand-bound books with brittle, yellowed pages. It was the temple's archive, a repository of ledgers, chronicles, and donated texts stretching back centuries. Under the pretext of studying the temple's architectural history to assist with the renovations, a plausible, even commendable excuse, Kenji began spending his free hours there. He started with the temple's official chronicles, massive tomes detailing the lineage of head monks, major repairs, and significant donations. The calligraphy was archaic, a challenge to his modern education. He spent hours hunched over a low wooden desk, carefully unrolling scrolls, his fingers smudging with dust. The work was arduous and mentally exhausting. Most entries were mundane. Records of rice donations, repairs to the roof after a typhoon in the 17th century, a list of new acolytes from the Meiji era. One afternoon, as he was deeply absorbed in a scroll detailing land grants from the Kamakura period, the shoji screen slid open with a soft rattle. Kenji's entire body went rigid. Satoshi stood there, a smirk playing on his lips. He didn't enter fully, just leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "Finding any ghosts in the old books, Kenji-san?" Satoshi's voice was laced with a casual venom. or just looking for a new story to tell your stone friends. Kenji's heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced himself to remain calm, to not look up from the scroll. He gestured vaguely at the text. Master Aikaku suggested I familiarize myself with the temple's structural history. It seems the foundation has been repaired many times. I thought it might be useful for the builders. The lie felt clumsy, but it was the best he had. Satoshi chuckled, a low, humorless sound. Of course, very diligent of you. I'm sure the head monk appreciates your newfound scholarly passion. He lingered for a moment longer, his silence more unnerving than his words. Then, with a final, knowing glance, he slid the door shut, leaving Kenji alone in the heavy quiet. The threat was clear: I'm still watching you. Shaken, Kenji almost gave up. The task felt impossible, a search for a single grain of sand on an endless shore. The fragments he held were purely emotional. How could he possibly find sorrow or grief in a historical ledger? But the alternative, living under Satoshi's thumb, his experience dismissed as madness, was unbearable. He pressed on. Weeks turned into a month. The autumn air grew sharper, and the ginkgo tree in the main courtyard rained down a carpet of gold. Kenji's search had become a ritual. He moved from the main chronicles to the less organized donation ledgers and personal journals left by previous monks. It was in one of these, a thin, unassuming book bound in dark blue cloth, its pages foxed with brown spots, that he found it. The journal belonged to a monk named Sojin, from what Kenji estimated was the late Muromachi period, some 400 years ago. Most of it was poetry and reflections on Dharma, but tucked away in the back were notes on temple patronage. And there, in faint, spidery ink, was a name, Lord Ishikawa. The entry was brief. It spoke of Lord Ishikawa's clan, local rulers known for a great tragedy. Monk Sojin wrote of a calamitous battle born of betrayal that had annihilated the clan's heirs. He mentioned the unending sorrow of the Lord's wife, a woman famed for her love of the arts and the cherry blossom gardens that surrounded their now-lost castle. Kenji's breath caught in his throat. Battle, sorrow, cherry blossoms, a symbol so often tied to life's transient beauty, but here, linked to overwhelming grief. It was all there. He read the final line, his fingers tracing the delicate characters. In his grief, the Lord commissioned 3 forms in stone, not as gods, but as eternal witnesses to what was lost. They were given to our temple for safekeeping, that their silence might speak to the ages. Kenji sat back, the small book resting in his lap. The dust motes danced in the fading light. It wasn't a ghost story or a mystical revelation. It was human. A story of a family, of ambition, of betrayal, and of a grief so profound it was immortalized in stone. The statues weren't speaking to him, they were remembering, and he, somehow, was listening. He now had a name, a time, and a story. The path was no longer shrouded in fog. It was a real, tangible investigation, and he had just taken the first solid step. The name echoed in the silence of the library, a single word that stitched together 3 disparate threads of pain: Ishikawa. Kenji sat before the open journal, the monk's spidery script abridged across 4 centuries. Sorrow, grief, battle. It was no longer a phantom ailment of his mind, but the recorded suffering of a man. The statues were not objects of idolatry. They were monuments of loss, eternal witnesses. A profound sense of responsibility settled over him, heavier than the temple's great bell. He had been chosen, not by a god or a spirit, but by the sheer, unyielding weight of human memory embedded in stone. The library had given him a name and a motive, but the heart of the story, the faces and the details, lay beyond the temple walls. He knew he had to go to Odawara. The nearby castle town was the administrative heart of the region, the most likely place to hold detailed records of its feudal clans. But leaving Saranjai was not a simple matter. A monk's life was one of routine and discipline, each day a mirror of the last. Unsanctioned excursions were unthinkable, and he had no justifiable reason to present to the head monk. His true purpose, to chase the ghosts of a fallen lord, would sound like madness. His anxiety sharpened the next morning during the dawn chants. He felt Satoshi's gaze on him, a persistent, probing stare that prickled the back of his neck. Satoshi's suspicion had not faded. It had curdled into a silent, watchful judgment. Kenji kept his eyes fixed on the sutras, his voice steady, but his mind raced, searching for a key to unlock the temple gates. The key presented itself that afternoon, in a passing comment from the head monk. He was complaining mildly about the low quality of their ink, noting that the finest sticks from the Kinkodo shop in Odawara were superior, but that no one had had the time for such a specific errand. An idea, clean and sharp, cut through Kenji's desperation. It was a deception, a violation of the precept of right speech, but it felt necessary. He would wrap his quest in the cloak of diligence. He waited until the evening meal, then approached the head monk, bowing low. "Master," he began, his voice carefully measured. "I overheard your concerns about the ink. If I may be so bold, I would be honored to make the journey to Odawara tomorrow to procure the proper supplies. It would be a good lesson in mindfulness, to focus on a simple, worldly task for the benefit of the temple." The head monk looked up from his rice, surprised. Kenji was known for his quiet, internal nature, not for volunteering for town errands. He studied Kenji's face for a long moment. Kenji held his breath, expecting a refusal, an interrogation. But the head monk saw only a young monk's earnest face, a mask of perfect sincerity. "A commendable thought, Kenji," he said finally, a rare smile touching his lips. "Very well. You may go after the morning duties are complete. Take only what you need for the journey and return before the evening bell." Relief washed over Kenji so intensely, it almost buckled his knees. He bowed again, murmuring his thanks, and avoided looking in Satoshi's direction as he returned to his seat. The first obstacle was cleared. The next day, Kenji walked the dusty road to Odawara, the unfamiliar freedom feeling both exhilarating and terrifying. The serene, ordered world of the temple, with its scent of incense and wood, gave way to the chaotic energy of the town. The air was thick with the cries of street vendors, the rumble of a passing motorcar, and the clatter of wooden geta on the packed earth. The sights were a dizzying collage. Women in vibrant kimonos walking alongside men in drab Western suits, hand-pulled carts laden with vegetables, and bright banners advertising everything from sake to film screenings. Kenji, in his stark gray robes, felt like a stone in a rushing river, an object from another time. He clutched the small purse with the temple's money, the weight of his lie a cold knot in his stomach. He went to the Kinkodo shop first, carefully selecting the ink sticks and brushes the head monk favored. The mundane task grounded him, the scent of the fine ink a familiar comfort. With his official errand complete, he tucked the wrapped package into his sleeve and turned toward his true destination, the town record's office. It was a small, unassuming wooden building tucked away on a side street, smelling of aging paper and dust. Behind a long counter sat a thin, elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose, his nameplate identifying him as Mr. Tanaka. He looked up, his expression one of mild annoyance at being disturbed. Kenji bowed deeply. "Forgive my intrusion," Kenji said softly. "I am a monk from Saranjai. I am conducting some research into the temple's local history and was hoping you might have records pertaining to the prominent families of this region from the Sengoku period." Mr. Tanaka grunted, unimpressed. "The Sengoku period? That's 400 years of bloodshed and shifting loyalties. You'll have to be more specific." Kenji's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment of truth. "I am particularly interested in the history of the Ishikawa clan." The archivist's expression changed. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a flicker of recognition and something else, a hint of melancholy. "Ishikawa," he repeated, the name spoken like a piece of local lore. "Ah, yes. The tragic lord, a sad story. Most of the official scrolls were lost when the Hojo clan fell, but the Ishikawa tale, that one survived in local accounts. A cautionary tale, they say." He slowly rose from his stool and shuffled toward a towering shelf in the back, returning with a long, thin box. Inside lay a collection of fragile, yellowed scrolls and a few hand-bound books. Lord Ishikawa was a vassal of the Hojo, but he was not like the others, Mr. Tanaka said, his voice lowering as if sharing a secret. They say he was more poet than warrior. He loved his family more than he loved power. He carefully unrolled a scroll for Kenji. As Kenji read the elegant, fading script, Mr. Tanaka filled in the gaps with the town's oral history. Lord Ishikawa's wife was Lady Akiko. Her great joy was the magnificent cherry blossom garden within their castle walls. They had one child, a son named Kaido, 5 years old. The 3 fragments of memory in Kenji's mind began to sharpen, to gain names and faces. The profound, directionless sorrow he'd first felt was that of Lord Ishikawa, a man who cherished peace and family above all else. The records then turned grim. While Lord Ishikawa was away securing a northern pass, a rival clan launched a surprise siege. The castle was undermanned and fell within a day. Lord Ishikawa returned 2 days later to find only smoke, ruins, and silence. Kenji stared at a specific passage, his blood running cold. Lady Akiko and her son, Mr. Tanaka murmured, pointing a bony finger at the text, were found in the main courtyard. Under the great sakura tree, the one she loved so much. They fell with the blossoms. The vision flooded Kenji's mind, not as a vague sensation, but as a horrifying reality. The storm of petals, the overwhelming grief. It was the moment of their death, witnessed by the tree, witnessed by the land itself. The third memory, the cacophony of battle, was the sound of his world ending, the final screams of his retainers, the destruction of his home. All 3 statues, all 3 memories, were facets of a single, unbearable day of loss for one man. Kenji sat back, the air knocked from his lungs. It was real. A family had been extinguished, a poet lord's heart broken, a tragedy so immense that it had somehow seeped into the very earth from which the statues were carved. He looked at the gentle, sad face of the archivist. Mr. Tanaka had delivered not just facts, but an epitaph. Kenji thanked him, his voice thick and unsteady. He gathered his package of ink and bowed, leaving the dusty silence of the archive and stepping back into the bright, indifferent afternoon. The knowledge he now carried was a terrible burden, far heavier than the temple supplies hidden in his sleeve. The story was no longer a mystery, but a wound. And as he began the long walk back, he felt with chilling certainty that the eternal witnesses had shown him what happened, but they had not yet shown him why. The journey back from Odawara was a silent pilgrimage. The rhythmic jostle of the bus, the murmur of other passengers, the passing landscape of rice paddies and sleepy villages, it all felt distant, a world seen through a film of water. Kenji sat with his hands clasped in his lap, the mundane canvas bag of supplies resting at his feet. But his mind was not on the rattling bus or the setting sun casting long shadows across the fields. It was in a besieged castle 400 years ago, under a storm of cherry blossoms, with a poet lord whose world had been shattered. Ishikawa, Akiko, Kaido, the names were no longer just entries in a dusty ledger. They were stones in his heart, heavy with unspoken grief. He disembarked at the familiar stop at the base of the mountain and began the steep walk up to Saranjai. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Every rustle of leaves in the wind, every cry of a late bird, seemed to echo the silence of the statues. He had left the temple that morning a monk driven by a strange, personal mystery. He was returning as the sole custodian of a family's forgotten tragedy. The knowledge didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a profound and sacred burden. Upon reaching the temple gates, Kenji bypassed the main hall and his own quarters. The evening meal could wait. His duty was elsewhere. He walked with a quiet purpose that he hadn't possessed before, his steps sure and steady as he made his way to the old, musty storeroom where the statues waited. He slid open the heavy wooden door, the familiar scent of old wood and dust greeting him. Moonlight, filtered through the high, grimy window, cast the room in a spectral silver light, illuminating the 3 figures in their eternal vigil. From the shadows near the zendo, Satoshi watched. He had noted Kenji's return, and his immediate deviation from the evening routine was instantly suspicious. He had expected Kenji to return flustered or perhaps triumphant from his errand. Instead, he saw a composure that was unnerving. Satoshi crept closer, concealing himself behind a stone lantern, his eyes fixed on the storeroom entrance. He wanted to catch Kenji in the act, to finally have irrefutable proof of his madness to present to the head monk. Inside, Kenji approached the statues not with the trepidation of their previous encounters, but with the reverence one would show at a family tomb. He looked first at the figure of the Lord, its face a mask of profound sorrow. He no longer saw just stone, he saw a husband and father. He bowed his head deeply. "Ishikawa-sama," he whispered, his voice soft but clear in the stillness. "I know your name, I know your sorrow." He then turned to the second statue, the woman whose grief was forever entwined with falling blossoms. He saw the love and the loss etched into her form. "Akiko-sama," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your love was not forgotten." Finally, he faced the small, defiant warrior, the boy who had faced an impossible end. Kenji's heart ached. "Kaito," he murmured, the name a painful breath. "Your courage is remembered." He spoke their names into the silence, offering them the one thing they had been denied for 4 centuries: acknowledgement. He wasn't receiving memories anymore. He was giving something back, a simple testament that their story had been heard. He stood there for a long time, the weight in his chest easing slightly, replaced by a clear, unshakable resolve. Acknowledgement was not enough. Their spirits, tethered to this ground by the violence of their end, deserved peace. Outside, Satoshi felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. He had heard Kenji's low murmuring, though he couldn't make out the exact words. He saw the solemnity of his posture, the deep, respectful bows. This was not the erratic, hand-wringing behavior he had witnessed before. This was a ritual. Kenji wasn't talking to himself. He was addressing the statues as if they were honored ancestors. The certainty of Kenji's madness began to waver in Satoshi's mind, replaced by a more unsettling thought. What if Kenji knew something he didn't? Kenji slid the storeroom door shut, his face set with determination. He walked directly to the head monk's quarters. He knew this was the greatest risk he had taken yet. He knocked softly on the wooden door frame. "Enter," came the abbot's calm, deep voice. The head monk, Jikai, was seated at his low desk, transcribing a sutra by the light of a single oil lamp. He looked up, his expression neutral as Kenji entered and prostrated himself. "Kenji, you have returned. I trust the supplies were procured?" "Yes, master," Kenji replied, remaining bowed, "but my journey yielded something else, something of great importance to this temple." Jikai set down his brush. "Go on." Taking a deep breath, Kenji began. He spoke not of visions or voices from stone. He anchored his story in fact, in evidence. He presented the old journal he had found, open to the page detailing Lord Ishikawa's commission of 3 statues as eternal witnesses. He then spoke of his research in the Odawara archives, carefully laying out the historical record of the castle siege, the names of the family, and the tragedy that befell them on land that was now part of the temple grounds. "Master," Kenji said, his voice steady and earnest, "for 400 years, the spirits of the Ishikawa family have gone unremembered. Their destruction is a forgotten part of our land's history. The statues unearthed are not mere decorations. They are the markers of a grave, a testament to a sorrow that has never been properly mourned." Jikai listened intently, his fingers steepled before him. His eyes moved from Kenji's sincere face to the ancient journal on his desk. He was a man of discipline and reason, wary of flights of fancy, but he was also a guardian of history and tradition. "What is it you are proposing, Kenji?" he asked, his tone measured. "I believe it is our duty," Kenji stated, meeting the head monk's gaze for the first time. "We must perform a kuyo, a formal memorial service to pacify the spirits of Lord Ishikawa, his wife Akiko, and their son Kaito, to acknowledge their suffering and guide them toward peace. It is the proper, compassionate thing to do." Silence descended upon the small room, thick and heavy. Kenji had laid bare his quest, stripped of its strangeness, and presented as a matter of historical duty and Buddhist compassion. Everything hinged on this moment. The fate of the Ishikawa family and his own future at the temple rested on the decision of the man sitting before him, whose expression was as unreadable as the ancient stone of the statues themselves. The air in the head monk's study was thick with the scent of old paper and cooling tea. Jikai sat motionless, his fingers steepled before him, his gaze fixed on the documents Kenji had laid out on the low table. The journal page, brittle with age, lay beside the crisp, official copy from the Odawara archive. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant caw of a crow. Kenji held his breath, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He had presented only the facts, a logical chain of evidence linking the temple grounds to a forgotten tragedy. He had said nothing of whispers from stone or visions of falling blossoms. Finally, Jikai drew a slow, deliberate breath. For 400 years, he said, his voice a low rumble, this temple has stood on ground that holds a deep sorrow. A family was extinguished here. A lord, his wife, his child. And we, the guardians of this place, knew nothing. He looked up, and his eyes, usually sharp with pragmatism, now held a profound gravity. You have not been distracted, Kenji. You have been attentive. You listened to a silence that no one else could hear and gave it a name. The purpose of a temple is to offer peace, not only to the living, but also to the memory of those who have passed. To fail in this is to fail in our most fundamental duty. He paused, his gaze unwavering. We will hold a kuyo. We will give the Ishikawa family the rights they were denied. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled Kenji's knees washed over him. He bowed deeply, his forehead nearly touching the tatami mat. Arigatou gozaimasu, Osho-sama. The news spread through the temple not as a story of a monk's strange visions, but as a discovery of historical importance. Jikai, in his wisdom, framed it as a testament to Kenji's scholarly diligence. The statues were not haunted artifacts, but historical markers of a local tragedy that demanded respect. The monks accepted this with solemn duty, even Satoshi. Kenji saw the conflict in Satoshi's eyes during the preparations. He was assigned to help Kenji move the 3 statues from their temporary place in the storeroom to a position of honor beside the main altar in the Hondo. As they lifted the first statue, the one of Lord Ishikawa, Satoshi's grip was tight, his movements stiff. They are just stone, Satoshi muttered, more to himself than to Kenji as they carefully placed it on a silk-draped platform. Carved by a man, weathered by the earth. Yes, Kenji replied softly, wiping a speck of dust from the statue's stoic face. But they were made to remember. That is a heavy burden for stone to carry alone. Satoshi fell silent, watching Kenji. He saw no feverish obsession now, only a quiet, focused reverence. This was not the strange, secretive man he had confronted in the storeroom. This was a monk performing a sacred duty with serene purpose. The cynicism in Satoshi's heart began to feel less like wisdom and more like a hollow shield. The day of the Kuyo dawned crisp and clear, a brilliant blue sky stretching over the tiled temple roofs. The air within the Hondo was still and fragrant with the highest quality of sandalwood incense. Monks in their finest robes knelt in perfect rows before the altar. The 3 statues, Ishikawa, Akiko, and Kaido, stood as silent guests of honor, bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. Freshly cut chrysanthemums and a bowl of polished rice were placed before them as offerings. Jikai began the ceremony, his voice filling the hall with the resonant, ancient words of the Heart Sutra. The monks joined in, their combined chant a deep, vibrating wave of sound that seemed to permeate the very timbers of the hall. Kenji knelt in the front row, his eyes closed. He did not seek out a connection or listen for a voice. He simply participated, adding his own voice to the river of prayer, directing all his intention, all his empathy, toward the 3 figures. He thought of Lord Ishikawa, the poet-warrior whose grief was so immense he commanded stone to bear witness. He thought of Akiko, her sorrow forever entwined with the beauty of the cherry blossoms under which she fell. And he thought of Kaido, the defiant boy, his final moments a maelstrom of terror and the clash of steel. As the chanting swelled to its crescendo, Kenji felt it. It was not a voice, not a vision of the past. It was a profound and gentle shift in the atmosphere around him. A quiet exhale. It was the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted, of a tension held for centuries finally being released. The suffocating sorrow, the sharp-edged grief, the echoing chaos, it all dissolved into the incense smoke, carried away on the cadence of the sutra. In its place, a vast, immeasurable peace settled into the room. A quiet sense of gratitude, as soft and intangible as a passing shadow. When the final chant faded and silence returned to the hall, the air felt different. Lighter, cleaner. Kenji opened his eyes. The statues looked the same, mere stone and pigment, but the oppressive aura that had clung to them was gone. They were no longer containers of pain, but simple, beautiful memorials. Their watch was over. Later that evening, as the other monks retired, Kenji found himself drawn back to the storeroom, now just a storeroom once more. He was about to slide the door shut when a figure appeared beside him. It was Satoshi. They stood in silence for a moment, looking into the empty space where the statues had been. "The head monk praised your research," Satoshi said, his voice quiet, devoid of its usual mocking edge. "He said you reminded us that compassion extends even to those whose names have been lost to time." He paused, glancing at Kenji. "You did a good thing, for them, for this temple." It was not an apology, but it was more than enough. It was an acknowledgement, an offering of peace. Kenji nodded, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. "We did it together." Satoshi gave a short, sharp nod and walked away into the deepening twilight. Kenji slid the storeroom door closed for the last time. He walked through the temple grounds, the cool night air on his face. The path led him to the old cherry tree, its bare branches a dark lattice against the moon. He stood beneath it, feeling not the echoes of tragedy, but the simple, enduring strength of its roots. He had not spoken to ghosts. He had listened to history's wounds. In helping the Ishikawa family find peace, he had discovered the true nature of his own path, not as one who sought enlightenment in solitude, but as one who found it in boundless compassion for the suffering of others, whether living or long since past.